The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this, they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this and told them to give her something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Chaos, crisis, and a crowd of people. Chaos, crisis, and a crowd of people. Some filled with joy and others showing signs of silent desperation. That's what Jesus encounters as soon as he gets off the boat. You see, Jesus' reputation has preceded him, and by now so many people, all kinds of people, crave the spiritual and emotional and physical healing that Jesus offers. Everyone can see that Jesus has the power of God within him. Jesus reaches out and touches all of those who even the faithful say are unclean under God's law. You know, the lepers and the lame and the blind and the deaf and the possessed and the spiritually ill. And Jesus brings comfort and peace even to family and friends who wait and worry and watch. And with all this healing going on, that's why people are jostling and jockeying for position, yearning to touch and be touched by Jesus. Everyone wants the same thing. Touch me, touch my son, touch my mother, reach out and touch my neighbor, my friend, touch the one that I love. And all around Jesus, eager, pleading hands are trying to reach out and touch him as well, to claim the healing that only God can provide. One man, Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, a person with great resources, a social and religious insider, someone who has lived a pure and holy life and always seeks to follow God's law, takes an incredible risk. He humbles himself. He falls down at Jesus' feet and begs Jesus again and again, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live. But even as Jesus goes with Jairus, the large crowd still follows Jesus and presses in on him, and suddenly Jesus stops. He just stops right there in the middle of the road, right in the middle of that dusty road, and he turns to the now silenced crowd and says, "Who touched my clothes?" Of course, the disciples think Jesus surely must be kidding, since everyone has been crowding in and reaching out to touch and be touched. But Jesus knows that something special has happened. And sure enough, a woman comes forward, a woman who is afraid and trembling, and falls at Jesus' feet, just as Jairus had fallen at Jesus' feet earlier. And she tells Jesus the whole truth. The whole truth. Now, this woman and Jairus could not be more different. In fact, here, beginning in verse 26, the narrator goes to great lengths in precise, cleverly constructed Greek to describe this woman in a long periodic sentence full of past participles for those who are into the English language. The woman, having suffered, having spent money, having not benefited, having gotten worse, having heard about Jesus, and having come up behind Jesus, here are all those past participles, and then comes the long-delayed main verb, that little, bump in the road. She touched Jesus' cloak. She has been participled, if you would, worse than most in her world, but by the end of the long periodic sentence, this unnamed woman still has the agency and the ability in her only indicative verb in the entire text to touch the one she knows can heal her. This poor woman, she has no name. She has no name. We know Jairus, of course, but she has no name. She's a non-person. She's the one we can ignore. She's become a social and religious outcast. She's considered unclean, untouchable, contaminated, contagious because of her condition. So that just by touching, just by reaching out and touching Jesus' cloak, she has defiled Jesus as well. Defiled him religiously. Not to mention defiling anyone else she has come in contact with. And even worse, according to God's law, she has risked the possibility of being stoned to death by the community of the faithful just for admitting what she has done. Just for having reached out and touched. So it's more than a little surprising, isn't it, that she tells the whole truth. But notice also that the woman's healing is no passive experience and that it becomes part of the healing in itself. The healing confirmation does not come first from without, but from within her. The woman knows immediately in her body that the healing has happened, and as everyone else is holding their collective breath, wondering what kind of condemnation, what rebuke Jesus will give this sin-filled woman, Jesus does a most amazing thing. He calls this nameless, previously faceless, and outcast woman daughter. He calls her daughter, my child, my little girl, with the same Greek word that Jairus had used in begging for his own little girl, daughter. Daughter, Jesus lovingly calls her as he publicly welcomes her back as an equal member of, into a relationship with, and within the community of all of God's people. Daughter, he says, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. But even as Jesus' shocking words are offering hope for a better future, where everyone receives God's mercy, love, and grace, some people come from Jairus' house announcing that there is no hope. No hope because Jesus is simply too late for Jairus' little girl, because his daughter, his child, is dead. But Jesus tells Jairus, do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. A better translation being not fear, only belief. Not fear, only belief. Have belief, have faith, like the faith of the woman who has now been restored to life in all of its abundance. And then going to Jairus' house while leaving most of his baffled disciples and followers behind and putting all the mockers and scoffers and laughers outside, Jesus commits a religious double defilement of himself as he reaches out and touches the ritually unclean and dead little girl's hand. He breaks all of the rules, Jesus does. He breaks all of the rules. And immediately then, this little girl, this 12-year-old girl who has lived the same number of years, notice, 12, as the woman with the hemorrhage had suffered, 12. This little girl then gets up, rises up, newly resuscitated, walks around, and even has something to eat. It's wonderful. Miracles. Miracles. That's what we call these stories, miracles. Unexplainable interventions by God into the world around us. And we might be tempted to analyze the intricate events and details and try to come up with some kind of formula or words for how we might just tap into this healing power that Jesus offered so that we might also get the miracle that we want, get the miracle that we need. But these stories about miracles that God can offer, they're stories about who God is and how our God acts. doing what may seem to us outrageous and incomprehensible, even impossible, baffling committed followers and bringing doubt and even mocking laughter from onlookers, but always putting the needs of God's people first and never ever being bound by any scriptural rule or restriction, but instead just reaching out again and again to touch and be touched by bodies and hearts and minds, to free people from anything that separates them from God and God's love. That's the healing that Jesus is seeking to bring. Healing from what separates us from God. Because you see, Jesus comes not to heal physically. Jesus comes to save. The Greek word in the original text describing what Jesus does is sozo. It does not mean to heal, but to save. Jesus does not come to perform miracles of physical healing. Jesus comes to save by offering hope in a future based upon faith. But faith, believing in God, trusting God, is often so very hard. So God gives us what we really need, not physical healing, but relationships. Relationships within a community of God's people, that thing we call the church, so that there are others to believe with us and even someone to believe for us when our own belief seems to have run out. For God gives us something far greater than physical healing. God gives us each other. God gives us each other. The sequoia trees of California, known as the great giant redwoods, are absolutely spectacular, towering as much as 300 feet above the ground and becoming wide enough to have, as you have seen in pictures or seen in person, a tunnel cut right through the middle of the trunk, allowing a car to drive right through. But the amazing thing about these sequoias is that these grand trees are supported by an unusually shallow root system. Very shallow roots, like little spider webs that are just under the surface of the ground, designed to catch as much of the possible surface moisture that they can. And this is their great vulnerability. Storms with heavy winds would almost certainly bring these giant trees crashing and tumbling to the ground. But the amazing thing is that rarely happens. It rarely happens because the trees only grow in clusters. They only grow together, standing side by side. Their roots intertwine. They reach out, those little roots, and touch each other and provide support for each other against any storm of any kind, any physical threat that comes. They support each other so that they can stand tall no matter what may come. And we together as the church, Christ's body in the world, offer that same kind of support so that no member of the church is ever alone. Oh, we come from different places and different races and different ages and genders and experiences and languages and sexual orientations, and we don't always share the same views theologically, politically, economically, or socially. And we may not like the same wording or ways for worship, and we may sometimes drive each other just a little bit crazy with our behaviors that we all think are just fine. But together we bear witness. We stand tall in one faith given by our one God, knowing that our differences, our diversity is our great strength, so that we stay together no matter what, as we are united in God's love. No, we don't always agree, but we reach out. We reach out and touch, as Christ reached out and touched. And we make ourselves open to the possibility that our lives could be transformed when others reach out and touch us as well. Because our faith becomes real when we do what Jesus did, not allowing anything, not even the most cherished of religious traditions, to separate us, to divide us, to exclude anyone from the power of God's love. But simply reach out and touch. Singer and music icon Diana Ross summed it up simply in 1970 in her first solo single, which still remains an international favorite today. It's called, of course, Reach Out and Touch. Reach out and touch. Reach out and touch somebody's hand. Make this world a better place if you can. Reach out and touch somebody's hand. Make this world a better place if you can. Yes, we as God's people do what Jesus did. We share God's saving presence. We reach out and touch and be touched. We do what the giant redwoods do, so that no one is ever alone. We reach out and we touch, and we are touched. We reach out and touch. We just reach out and touch.